The air in the grand ballroom of the Carlisle crackled with an electric anticipation, a symphony of hushed whispers and the clinking of champagne flutes. Tonight was the night of the annual Innovator of the Year awards, and all eyes were on the golden boy of the tech world, Mr. Harrison Hayes. He was the man who had everything: a billion-dollar empire, a dazzling smile, and a seemingly perfect life. But as he stepped onto the stage, a smug grin playing on his lips, he wasn't about to thank his team or his investors. No, he was about to introduce the world to his true inspiration, his beautiful raven-haired mistress, Anya. Little did he know his pregnant wife, Emma, was standing at the back of the ballroom, her hand trembling as she clutched the ultrasound of their unborn child. The perfect life was about to implode. The Carlisle's grand ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and tailored tuxedos. It was a room that reeked of old money and new ambition, a place where fortunes were made and reputations were shattered with a single well-placed whisper. And tonight, the whispers were all for Harrison Hayes. At 34, he was the wunderkind of the financial technology world, the man who had single-handedly revolutionized the way we think about money. His company, Apex Innovations, was the darling of Wall Street, and tonight he was being honored with the prestigious Innovator of the Year award. From her seat at the front table, Emma Hayes watched her husband work the room. He moved with an easy grace, a charismatic predator in his natural habitat. He would clap a hand on the shoulder of a grizzled CEO, share a laugh with a venture capitalist, and then turn to flash a dazzling smile at a society columnist, all without missing a beat. He was a master of performance, a chameleon who could be whatever anyone wanted him to be, and for the past 5 years he had been her husband. Emma smoothed down the silk of her emerald green gown, the fabric stretching taut over her burgeoning belly. She was 6 months pregnant with their first child, a boy. They had picked out a name, Oliver. She had spent the last week agonizing over what to wear, wanting to look every bit the supportive, glowing wife of the man of the hour. But as she sat there, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It was a feeling that had been her constant companion for the past few months, a cold, creeping dread that she couldn't quite name. It had started with the late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls he would take in the other room, the way he would flinch when she reached for his phone. He had an explanation for everything, of course. A new project, a demanding client, a sudden crisis. And she had wanted to believe him. She loved him after all. Or at least she loved the man she thought he was. The man she had married was a struggling entrepreneur with a dream and a beat-up sedan. They had built his empire together, brick by painstaking brick. She had been his sounding board, his confidant, his biggest cheerleader. She had believed in him when no one else did. And for a while it had been perfect. They were a team, a partnership. But somewhere along the way, as the money and the fame poured in, she had started to feel like less of a partner and more of a prop. A beautiful, well-dressed prop to be displayed on his arm at events like this. A sudden burst of applause pulled her from her thoughts. Harrison was on stage accepting his award. He looked impossibly handsome under the warm glow of the spotlights, his dark hair artfully disheveled, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. He launched into his acceptance speech, his voice smooth and confident. He thanked his team, his investors, his mentors. He spoke of innovation and disruption, of changing the world. It was a speech she had heard 100 times before, a carefully crafted performance designed to charm and inspire. "But there's one person," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "that I need to thank above all others. The one who has been my rock, my inspiration, my true north." Emma's heart swelled with a familiar mix of pride and love. This was it. This was the moment that would make all the late nights and lonely dinners worthwhile. He was going to thank her. He was going to acknowledge her contribution, their partnership. She felt a tear prick the corner of her eye, and she quickly dabbed it away with her napkin. "She's a woman of incredible strength, of fierce intelligence, and of breathtaking beauty." Harrison continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, but he wasn't looking at Emma. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere to her left, She's the one who truly understands me, who pushes me to be a better man, and I want to take this opportunity to introduce her to all of you." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the typical corporate award ceremony speech. This was something different, something scandalous. Emma's blood ran cold. She followed his gaze, her eyes landing on a woman she had never seen before. She was tall and slender, with a mane of glossy black hair and a dress the color of blood. She was stunning in a sharp, angular way that was the complete opposite of Emma's own classic, understated beauty. The woman was looking at Harrison with an expression of such adoration, such possessiveness, that it made Emma's stomach churn. "Please join me in welcoming," Harrison boomed, his voice filled with a triumphant joy that was like a knife to Emma's heart. "The love of my life, the future Mrs. Hayes, Anya Volkov." The name hung in the air, a poisoned dart that found its mark in the center of Emma's soul. The woman Anya stood up and glided towards the stage, a predatory smile on her face. The spotlight followed her, bathing her in a halo of golden light. She joined Harrison on stage, and he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. They kissed a long, passionate kiss that was meant to be seen, to be photographed, to be talked about. The ballroom was in an uproar. Cameras flashed. People gasped, whispers turned into shouts. But Emma heard none of it. All she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart, a drumbeat of betrayal and despair. She was vaguely aware of people turning to stare at her, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was the jilted wife, the tragic figure in this real-life soap opera. Her hand went to her belly, a protective gesture. The ultrasound picture was in her purse, a small black-and-white image of a life that was supposed to be a symbol of their love. Now it was just a reminder of a lie. Slowly she got to her feet. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move. She had to get out of there. She had to escape the prying eyes, the suffocating pity. As she stumbled towards the exit, her eyes met Harrison's. For a fleeting moment she saw a flicker of something in his expression. Guilt. Regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, hard indifference. He had made his choice, and it wasn't her. As the heavy doors of the ballroom swung shut behind her, the sound of applause and celebration was replaced by the deafening silence of her own shattered heart. The fairy tale was over. The gilded cage had burst open, and Emma Hayes was left to pick up the pieces of her life, a life that had been built on a foundation of lies. The only thing real was the tiny life growing inside of her, a life she would now have to protect at all costs. From the man she had once called her husband. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt like a prison. Emma had been admitted for observation, the doctors concerned about the stress of the situation on her and the baby. She had been there for 3 days of a numb, hollow ache that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her chest. She hadn't cried, not yet. The tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to be strong for Oliver. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly, a relentless barrage of calls and texts from friends, family, and a horde of reporters who had somehow gotten her number. She had ignored them all. What could she possibly say? That her husband had publicly humiliated her in front of the entire world? That her perfect life was a sham? That she was alone, pregnant, and terrified? The only person she had spoken to was her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Catherine. Catherine had been a godsend, a calm, steady voice in the midst of the chaos. She had already filed for divorce, citing adultery and emotional distress. She had also filed for a restraining order against Harrison, a move that had made Emma feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. On the 4th day, there was a knock on her door. A nurse poked her head in a hesitant smile on her face. "You have a visitor," she said. "He says he's your brother." Emma's heart leaped. Her brother Liam. He was a foreign correspondent, always off in some war-torn corner of the world. She hadn't seen him in over a year. She nodded, and a moment later Liam walked in. He looked older than she remembered, his face etched with worry lines, his sandy hair streaked with gray. But his eyes were the same, a warm, comforting blue that had always made her feel safe. He didn't say anything. He just crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into a hug. And that's when the tears came. A torrent of them, hot and raw, soaking the front of his shirt. He just held her, murmuring soothing words until the storm passed. "I came as soon as I heard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Elle. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I never liked him," he said, a hard edge to his voice. "I always thought he was a smug, self-serving bastard. I just wish I had said something sooner." "It wouldn't have made a difference," she said, a bitter smile on her face. "I was blind. I saw what I wanted to see." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor. Then Liam cleared his throat. "There's something else," he said, his voice hesitant. "Something you need to know." He pulled out his laptop and opened a file. It was a series of photographs. The first one was of Harrison and Anya laughing together on a yacht in the south of France. The date stamp was from 6 months ago, when Emma had been in her first trimester, sick with morning sickness and happily planning their future. The next photo was of them in Paris, kissing in front of the Eiffel Tower, and the next, a globe-trotting tour of their illicit affair. But it was the last photo that made Emma's blood run cold. It was a picture of Anya, her hand resting on her own slightly rounded stomach. It had been taken a few weeks ago at a charity gala in London. Anya was pregnant. The room started to spin. Emma felt like she was going to be sick. Anya was pregnant. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It wasn't just about Harrison choosing another woman. It was about him choosing another family, another life. How far along is she?" Emma managed to choke out. "From what my sources tell me, about 4 months. Liam said, his voice grim. 4 months. That meant he had gotten them both pregnant at the same time. The callousness of it, the sheer breathtaking cruelty, was almost too much to bear. "There's more," Liam said, his voice even grimmer. "Anya Volkov. She's not just some pretty face, Elle. Her father is Dmitry Volkov." The name sent a shiver down Emma's spine. Dmitry Volkov was a notorious Russian oligarch, a man with a reputation for being ruthless and dangerous. He was a man you did not want to cross. "What does he have to do with this?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "He's one of Harrison's biggest investors," Liam said. "He poured millions into Apex Innovations. But he's not just an investor. He's a silent partner. And from what I've been able to gather, he's been laundering money through the company for years." The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the sudden trips abroad. It wasn't about another woman. It was about something much bigger, much more dangerous. Harrison hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been using their marriage as a cover for his criminal activities. So the whole thing, the award, the speech, it was all a charade. Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a power play," Liam said. "A way for Harrison to solidify his alliance with Volkov, to show him that he was all in. By publicly choosing Anya, he was choosing the Volkovs. He was choosing the money, the power, the protection. And in doing so, he had thrown Emma and their unborn child to the wolves." A cold, hard anger started to replace the grief and the shock. She had been a fool, a naive, trusting fool. But she wasn't a victim, not anymore. She had been wronged, yes. Betrayed, humiliated, and discarded. But she was not broken. She looked at her brother, a new resolve hardening her gaze. "I'm not going to let them get away with this," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm not going to let them destroy my life and my son's future." Liam smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "That's my girl," he said. "So what's the plan?" Emma took a deep breath. "The plan," she said, a dangerous glint in her eye, "is to burn them to the ground." The first step in Emma's plan for retribution was to hit Harrison where it hurt the most, his wallet. With Catherine's expert guidance, they filed a lawsuit that was as audacious as it was brilliant. They weren't just suing for divorce. They were suing for a controlling interest in Apex Innovations. The legal argument was simple yet powerful. Emma had been more than just a supportive wife. She had been an integral part of the company's inception. The initial seed money for Apex had come from a trust fund her grandmother had left her. She had been the one who had tirelessly networked in the early days, her social connections opening doors that would have otherwise remained firmly shut for a then unknown Harrison. She had proof too. Old emails, business plans she had co-authored, and a paper trail that clearly showed her financial contributions. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the financial world. Harrison, who had expected a quiet, quick divorce, was suddenly facing a battle for control of his own company. His carefully constructed image as a self-made man was beginning to crumble. The media, which had once fawned over him, was now digging into his past, unearthing stories of his ruthless business practices and his less than humble beginnings. But Emma knew that a financial attack wasn't enough. She wanted to dismantle the entire edifice of lies that Harrison and the Volkovs had built, and for that she needed more information. She needed to know everything about Dmitry Volkov and his connection to Apex. That's where Liam came in. Using his network of contacts in the world of investigative journalism, he began to dig deep into Volkov's shady past. He uncovered a trail of corruption, bribery, and violence that stretched from Moscow to London to New York. Volkov was a man who had built his empire on the ruins of others, a man who would stop at nothing to protect his interests. As Liam delved deeper, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Volkov had a history of making his enemies disappear. Journalists who had gotten too close, business rivals who had stood in his way, even a former associate who had threatened to expose him. They had all vanished without a trace. The danger was real. But so was Emma's determination. She refused to be intimidated. She had lost everything. She had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Harrison was starting to feel the pressure. The lawsuit was a nightmare, a constant drain on his time and resources. His investors were getting nervous, the company's stock was plummeting, and the media was having a field day with the scandal. He tried to reach out to Emma to offer her a settlement, but she refused to even speak to him. He was used to getting what he wanted, to being in control. But for the first time in his life, he was powerless. And then there was Anya. The initial thrill of their public debut had quickly faded, replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. The media scrutiny was relentless, and Anya, who had always craved the spotlight, was starting to wilt under the harsh glare of public condemnation. She had imagined a life of glamour and adoration as the new Mrs. Hayes, but instead she was being branded as a homewrecker, a gold digger, a scarlet woman. Their arguments became more frequent, more vicious. She accused him of not protecting her, of not being man enough to silence the critics. He in turn resented her for the mess she had helped create. The passion that had once defined their relationship was curdling into a toxic mix of resentment and recrimination. And then the unthinkable happened. Anya had a miscarriage. The news was a devastating blow to both of them, but for different reasons. For Anya, it was the loss of a child, a dream, a future. For Harrison, it was the loss of his connection to the Volkovs. The baby had been his bargaining chip, his way of solidifying his place in their powerful dynasty. Without it, he was just another one of Dmitry Volkov's disposable assets. And Dmitry Volkov was not a man who tolerated failure. The old oligarch summoned Harrison to his palatial estate on the outskirts of London. The meeting was short and brutal. Volkov made it clear that Harrison had one chance and one chance only to fix the mess he had created. He was to win the lawsuit, silence his wife, and get the company back on track. If he failed, the consequences would be severe. Harrison left the meeting in a cold sweat. He had made a deal with the devil, and now the devil was coming to collect. He was trapped, caught between a wife who was determined to destroy him and a father-in-law who would not hesitate to do the same. Desperate, he made a fatal mistake. He tried to intimidate Emma. He sent a thuggish-looking man to follow her, to watch her every move. He thought it would scare her, make her back down. But he had underestimated her. He had forgotten the fire that burned beneath her quiet exterior. Emma, with Liam's help, turned the tables on him. They documented the harassment, collected evidence of the threats, and went to the police. A restraining order was issued, and Harrison was now facing criminal charges. The scandal reached a fever pitch. Harrison Hayes, the golden boy of the tech world, was now a pariah. His company was in free fall, his reputation was in tatters, and he was facing a lengthy prison sentence. The empire he had built on a foundation of lies was crumbling, and he was being buried in the rubble. And Emma. She was just getting started. She had taken her pain and her anger and forged them into a weapon, and she was ready to strike the final fatal blow. The lawsuit was a drawn-out, brutal affair. The courtroom became a theater of cruelty where every secret was unearthed, every lie exposed. Harrison's legal team, a pack of high-priced sharks, tried to paint Emma as a scorned woman, a vindictive shrew who was only after his money. They brought up her past relationships, her family history, anything they could find to discredit her. But Emma refused to be broken. She sat in the witness stand calm and composed and told her story. She spoke of her love for Harrison, of the dreams they had shared, of the company they had built together. She spoke of his betrayal, of the public humiliation, of the fear she had felt for her and her unborn child. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth, and the truth was more powerful than any lie Harrison's lawyers could spin. The tide of public opinion, which had been slowly turning against Harrison, now became a tidal wave. He was no longer just an adulterer. He was a monster. A man who had emotionally and financially abused his pregnant wife. His carefully crafted persona was shattered, and the man underneath was revealed to be a petty, cruel, and pathetic figure. And then came the twist that no one, not even Emma, could have predicted. Anya Volkov, the woman who had stood so proudly by Harrison's side at the award ceremony, the woman who had been the catalyst for this whole mess, walked into the courtroom and asked to testify. For Emma. The courtroom was in an uproar. Harrison's lawyers objected, but the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman who had clearly had enough of Harrison's theatrics, allowed it. Anya took the stand, a pale, fragile figure in a simple black dress. She looked nothing like the glamorous, confident woman who had stolen Emma's husband. She looked broken. In a soft, trembling voice, she told her story. She spoke of her whirlwind romance with Harrison, of how he had swept her off her feet with his charm and his promises of a fairy tale life. She spoke of her father, of the immense pressure she had been under to please him to secure the family's investment in Apex. And then she dropped the bombshell. She had never been pregnant. The courtroom gasped. Harrison's face went white. Anya explained that the pregnancy had been a lie, a scheme concocted by her and Harrison to manipulate her father. They had thought that the prospect of a grandchild would make Dmitry Volkov more invested in Harrison's success, more willing to protect him from his enemies. But the lie had spiraled out of control. The miscarriage had been a lie too, a desperate attempt to explain away a pregnancy that had never existed. But the guilt, she said, had been eating her alive. She couldn't live with the lie anymore. And then she looked directly at Emma. Her eyes filled with a raw, desperate plea for forgiveness. "I am so sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was a fool. I was a pawn in his game just like you were." The testimony was a devastating blow to Harrison's case. It was one thing to be an adulterer. It was another to be a manipulative, pathological liar who had used two women as pawns in his twisted game of power and greed. The judge had heard enough. She ruled in Emma's favor, granting her the divorce, a substantial financial settlement, and most importantly, a 51% controlling interest in Apex Innovations. Emma was now the majority shareholder of the company she had helped build. She was in control. But the victory felt hollow. She had won, but at what cost? She had exposed her private life to the world. She had endured months of public scrutiny and personal attacks. And she had seen the lives of two other people, Harrison and Anya, completely destroyed. As she left the courtroom, she was swarmed by reporters, all shouting questions, all wanting a piece of her story. She ignored them, her eyes searching for Liam. He was waiting for her at the edge of the crowd, a proud smile on his face. He wrapped his arm around her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. It was over. The battle was won. Now it was time to rebuild. But as they walked away, a man in a dark suit stepped out of the shadows. He handed Emma a plain white envelope and then disappeared back into the crowd. Emma's hand trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a photograph. A picture of her taken that morning as she left her apartment. And scrawled across the bottom in a crude, threatening hand were 2 words, "You're next." The message was clear. Dmitry Volkov was not a man who forgave or forgot. He had lost his investment, his connection to Apex, and his daughter's loyalty, and he was going to make someone pay. The war was not over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. The threat from Dmitry Volkov cast a long, dark shadow over Emma's victory. The photograph was a chilling reminder that she had not just defeated her ex-husband, she had made an enemy of a man who operated outside the law, a man for whom violence was just another business tactic. Fear was a cold, constant companion, but Emma refused to let it paralyze her. She had come too far, fought too hard to be intimidated now. With Liam's help, she hired a team of private security guards, turning her apartment into a veritable fortress. She varied her routines, never took the same route twice, and learned to look over her shoulder. It was a life lived on high alert, a life under siege. But she didn't just play defense. She decided to take the fight to Volkov. She knew that the only way to truly be safe was to expose him, to dismantle his criminal empire from the inside out. It was a risky, almost suicidal gambit, but it was the only move she had left. Her new position as the CEO of Apex Innovations gave her the weapon she needed. She had access to the company's financials, to every transaction, every email, every secret that Harrison had tried so desperately to bury. She hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the business, and set them loose on the company's books. What they found was staggering. A complex web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and fraudulent invoices, all designed to launder Volkov's dirty money. It was a massive, sophisticated operation, and Harrison had been at the center of it all. As Emma and her team untangled the web of deceit, they discovered something even more shocking. Harrison hadn't just been laundering money for Volkov. He had been skimming off the top, siphoning off millions of dollars into his own secret accounts. He had been playing a dangerous double game, betraying not only his wife, but also his ruthless benefactor. This was the leverage Emma needed. She now had proof of Harrison's betrayal, evidence that would be of great interest to Dmitry Volkov. She had a way to turn them against each other. Meanwhile, Harrison was a man on the edge. He had lost his company, his reputation, and his freedom. He was out on bail awaiting trial on charges of perjury and harassment, but he knew that was just the beginning. The SEC was investigating Apex, and it was only a matter of time before they uncovered the money laundering scheme. He was facing a lifetime in prison. Desperate and alone, he reached out to the only person he thought might still be on his side, Anya. He found her in a small, run-down apartment on the other side of town, a world away from the lavish lifestyle she had once known. She was a shadow of her former self. Her once vibrant beauty faded, her eyes hollow and empty. He pleaded with her, begged her to help him, to go to her father and ask for mercy. He tried to charm her, to manipulate her, to rekindle the dying embers of their toxic love affair. But Anya was no longer the naive, starstruck girl he had once known. The fire had gone out of her, replaced by a cold, hard emptiness. "You destroyed my life," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You used me, you lied to me, and you threw me away when I was no longer useful to you. Why should I help you?" "Because you loved me," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "No," she said, a bitter smile on her face. "I loved the man I thought you were, but that man never existed. The only person you have ever loved is yourself." She turned her back on him, a final, definitive act of rejection. Harrison was left standing in the doorway, a broken man who had finally run out of lies. He had one last card to play, one last desperate move. He would go to Volkov himself, confess to everything, and beg for forgiveness. He would offer to give back the money he had stolen, to do whatever it took to get back in the old man's good graces. It was a fool's errand, but it was all he had left. He flew to London unannounced and went to Volkov's estate. He was met at the gate by two of Volkov's stone-faced bodyguards. They escorted him not to the main house, but to a small, secluded guest house at the edge of the property. Volkov was waiting for him, sitting in a leather armchair, a glass of vodka in his hand. He looked at Harrison with a cold, dead-eyed stare that sent a shiver down Harrison's spine. Harrison started to talk, his voice a torrent of apologies, excuses, and promises. He confessed to the money laundering, to the skimming, to the lies. He offered to pay back every penny with interest. He groveled, he begged, he pleaded. Volkov listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Harrison was finished, he took a slow sip of his vodka and then spoke, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You are a fool, Harrison," he said. "You think money is what this is about. You think I care about the pittance you stole from me." He stood up and walked over to a small ornate box on the mantelpiece. He opened it and took out a single small object. It was a baby's rattle, silver and intricately carved. "This was for my grandson," he said, his voice thick with a grief that was all the more terrifying for its cold, quiet intensity. "You took him from me. You took my legacy." He looked at Harrison, and for the first time Harrison saw a flicker of emotion in the old man's eyes. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. "You took everything from me," Volkov said, his voice barely a whisper. "And now I will take everything from you." He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. The two bodyguards stepped forward, their faces grim and determined. Harrison's blood ran cold. He had walked into a trap. He had come seeking mercy, but he had found only retribution. The reckoning was at hand. Just as Volkov's men were about to drag Harrison away to an unknown but undoubtedly grim fate, the doors to the guest house burst open. A team of heavily armed men in tactical gear stormed the room, their weapons trained on Volkov and his bodyguards. "Metropolitan Police!" a voice boomed. "Drop your weapons." Volkov, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely surprised. His men, caught off guard, hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. In that moment the police swarmed them, disarming them and forcing them to the ground. In the midst of the chaos, two figures emerged from behind the shield of police officers. It was Emma and Liam. Emma's heart was pounding in her chest, but she met Volkov's furious gaze with a look of cold, unwavering resolve. She had known that coming here was a risk, a massive, life-threatening risk, but it was a calculated one. She had anticipated that Harrison, in his desperation, would eventually run to Volkov, and she had used him as bait. Working with Liam and her team of forensic accountants, she had compiled a mountain of evidence against Volkov, enough to put him away for a very long time. But she knew that getting the British authorities to act against a man as powerful and well-connected as Volkov would be difficult. She needed something more, something irrefutable. She needed to catch him in the act, so she had made a deal. She had approached a high-ranking official at MI6, a man Liam knew from his time as a foreign correspondent, and had laid out her plan. She would leak the information about Harrison's stolen millions to one of Volkov's known associates, knowing that it would get back to the old man. She would then use Harrison as a Trojan horse, a way to get inside Volkov's compound. It was a long shot, a gamble that could have easily gotten them all killed. But it had worked. As the police led a sputtering, furious Volkov away in handcuffs, Emma's eyes met Harrison's. He looked at her with a mixture of awe, confusion, and something that almost resembled gratitude. She had saved his life. A few days later, Emma received a message from Harrison. He wanted to meet. He said he had something for her. Against her better judgment and against Liam's strenuous objections, she agreed. They met in a neutral location, a quiet cafe in a busy part of town. Harrison looked like a different man. The swagger, the arrogance, the charm, it was all gone. He looked tired and old and broken. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a flash drive across the table. "This is everything," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Every deal, every transaction, every secret. It's the key to Volkov's entire network. There are names on there, powerful people, people you wouldn't expect. It's enough to bring the whole rotten edifice crashing down." Emma looked at him surprised. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Consider it a penance," he said, a bitter smile on his face. "I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, my freedom. I'm going to prison, Emma. I know that. But maybe I can do one good thing before I go. Maybe I can help you finish what you started." He stood up to leave, then hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice so low she could barely hear it. "For everything." And then he was gone, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd, a ghost of the man he had once been. Emma took the flash drive and gave it to Liam. The information it contained was a bombshell, a roadmap to the heart of Volkov's criminal empire. It implicated politicians, judges, and high-ranking officials in several different countries. The scandal was a global one. Arrests were made, resignations were tendered, and careers were ruined. The Volkov empire, once thought to be untouchable, crumbled like a house of cards. Emma had done it. She had taken on a monster and won. She had not only survived, she had triumphed. A few weeks later, as she was preparing to give birth, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. It was Anya. "I just wanted to say, thank you," Anya said, her voice small and hesitant. "You didn't have to help me. You could have let my father destroy me. But you didn't." Anya went on to explain that she had entered a witness protection program and was starting a new life far away from the wreckage of her past. She was finally free from her father's suffocating influence. "I hope you find happiness, Anya," Emma said, and she meant it. She had let go of the anger, the resentment, the bitterness. It was a weight she no longer wanted to carry. As she hung up the phone, she felt a sense of closure. The war was finally over. All the battles had been fought. All the demons had been vanquished. A few days later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Oliver, just as she had always planned. As she held him in her arms, looking down at his tiny, perfect face, she knew that this was what mattered. This was her victory. This was her future. She had walked through fire and had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She was Emma Hayes, the woman who had lost everything and then gained it all back on her own terms. She was a mother, a CEO, a survivor. And her story was just beginning. A year can feel like a lifetime. 12 months prior, Emma's world had been a glittering ruin, a stage for public humiliation and private terror. Now, as she stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her CEO office at Apex Innovations, the sprawling city skyline laid out before her like a kingdom she had conquered, the past felt like a distant, murky dream. The office itself was a testament to the new era. Gone were the ostentatious cold chrome and black leather furnishings. Harrison had favored a style that screamed of sterile power and masculine ego. In their place were warm woods, comfortable modern furniture, and vibrant works by up-and-coming local artists. The air, once thick with fear and ruthless ambition, now felt light, breathable, charged with a new collaborative energy. At the heart of this transformation was Emma. She had taken the helm of a company teetering on the brink of moral and financial collapse and had steered it into calmer, more prosperous waters. Her first act as CEO had been to call an all-hands meeting. She had stood before the hundreds of employees, many of whom had only known her as the quiet, smiling wife on Harrison's arm, and she had spoken with a raw honesty that had stunned them into silence. She didn't gloss over the scandal. She called it by its name, a betrayal not just of her, but of every employee's trust and hard work. She laid out the full extent of the financial rot left by Harrison and Volkov, And then, with unwavering confidence, she presented her plan to heal the company from the inside out. She had instituted what she called the Apex Restoration Project. It was a complete overhaul of their corporate governance. She established a truly independent board, implemented radical financial transparency policies, and created an ethics committee with real teeth. She championed a culture of collaboration over competition, where innovation was rewarded, not just the bottom line. It was a philosophy born from her own painful experience that a foundation built on lies, no matter how grand the facade, is destined to crumble. And it worked. The market, initially skeptical, responded to the genuine change. Investors returned, top talent flocked to the company, and the stock price, once in a free fall, began a steady, impressive climb. Emma Hayes was no longer a human interest story. She was a business world icon. The comeback CEO featured on the covers of magazines that had once printed her tear-streaked photo. In the adjoining office, separated by a pane of soundproof glass, her real treasure played. Oliver, now a sturdy 1-year-old with his mother's determined eyes and a head of unruly dark hair, was stacking blocks with his nanny. His happy, gurgling laughter was the constant soundtrack to Emma's new life, a joyful, grounding reminder of what was truly at stake, of why she had fought so ferociously. Liam remained her rock. He had officially joined Apex as the head of corporate strategy, though his real title was Emma's chief confidant, protector, and doting uncle. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat in her office sharing a bottle of wine as the city lights began to twinkle to life. "Do you ever think about it?" Liam asked quietly, swirling the red liquid in his glass. "The trial, Volkov, all of it." Emma gazed out the window. "I don't dwell on it," she said, "but I don't forget it either. It's part of my story. It's the fire that forged this." She gestured around the office at the life she had built. "Sometimes I feel a phantom pain, a memory of the fear. But then I look at Oliver, and I look at what we're building here, and I know it was all worth it." "I'm proud of you, Elle," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You faced down monsters and didn't become one." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." It was a few weeks later that the letter arrived, delivered by a certified courier. The postmark was from a federal correctional facility in upstate New York. Her stomach tightened as she saw the familiar, elegant handwriting on the envelope. Harrison. She waited until Oliver was asleep and she was alone in the quiet of her apartment before she opened it. The letter was several pages long, written on thin prison-issue paper. The arrogant, self-assured tone she knew so well was gone, replaced by a raw, stripped-down humility. "Emma," it began, "I know there are no words that can undo the damage I have done. No apology that can erase the pain I caused you. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to it. I am writing because in the deafening silence of this place I have been forced to finally meet the man I became, and I am horrified by him. I spent my life chasing a ghost, a vision of success that was always just out of reach. The more I got, the more I needed. The money, the power, the acclaim. It was a drug, and I was a desperate addict. I used people. I used you, who gave me everything, who believed in me when I was nothing. I took your love, your trust, and your money, and I twisted them into something ugly to fuel my own insatiable ego. I told myself it was for us, but it was only ever for me." The night of the awards. I see it in my nightmares. I see the look on your face. I convinced myself it was a power move, a necessary step. But the truth is, it was an act of profound cowardice and cruelty. I was too weak to end our marriage honestly, so I chose to shatter it and you in the most public way imaginable. It was unforgivable. I don't know what the future holds for me. I have a long time to sit in this cell and reckon with my choices. But I want you to know, I hope you and Oliver have a life filled with the peace and happiness you so richly deserve. The world is a better place with you leading and creating in it. I am finally and eternally sorry." Emma read the letter twice, the paper trembling in her hands. The words were a ghost of the man she had loved, a final, painful echo of their shared history. There was no rekindling of old feelings, no spark of affection. But the burning hatred she had carried for so long had finally cooled, leaving behind a profound and sorrowful pity. He was a chapter, a painful, scarring, but ultimately closed chapter of her life. She folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and locked it away in a box of things she would one day explain to her son. A month later, on a crisp autumn Saturday, Emma was at a playground in Central Park. Oliver, squealing with delight, was attempting to climb the slide for the 10th time. As she helped him to his feet, she heard a soft voice say her name. She turned and her breath caught in her throat. It was Anya. She looked different. The sharp, predatory glamour was gone. Her hair was a softer brown, and she wore no makeup. She was dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. She was with a man, a pleasant-looking professor type with kind eyes, and they were holding hands. For a moment, a tense silence hung between the two women, the ghosts of their past hovering in the crisp air. I didn't know if I should say anything. Anya began, her voice hesitant. It's all right, Emma replied, her voice gentle. I live nearby now, Anya explained. I'm teaching art history at a community college. It's quiet. She glanced at the man beside her, who gave her hand a supportive squeeze. This is Robert. It's nice to meet you, Emma said, offering a small smile. I just wanted to say, Anya continued, her eyes meeting Emma's, that I hope you are happy. After everything, you deserve it. I read about all the good you're doing with the company. Thank you, Anya. I hope you're happy too, Emma said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it with all her heart. They were not friends and never could be, but they were no longer enemies. They were simply two women survivors of the same shipwreck who had managed to swim to different shores and build new lives. Anya smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. I am. As Anya and her partner walked away hand in hand, Emma turned back to her son, who had finally conquered the slide and was beaming with pride. She swept him up in a fierce hug, burying her face in his soft hair, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of him. She had once believed in fairy tales and a perfect gilded life. Now she knew that life was not a pristine, untouchable object. It was messy and painful and gloriously imperfect. True strength wasn't about avoiding the fall. It was about the grace and courage with which you got back up. She had been betrayed, shattered, and left for dead. But she had risen. She had faced down her dragons and discovered a power within herself she never knew she possessed. Holding Oliver close as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Emma felt a profound sense of peace. She had lost a husband, but she had found her purpose. She had been stripped of a false identity and had forged a new one in the fires of adversity. She was Emma Hayes, a mother, a leader, a survivor. Her greatest story was not the one that had been so cruelly written for her, but the one she was now writing for herself, page by glorious page. And the best was yet to come. And there you have it, the incredible, tumultuous, and ultimately triumphant story of Emma Hayes. A story that proves that even in the face of the most devastating betrayals, the human spirit can not only endure, but can rise from the ashes stronger and more powerful than before. It's a reminder that sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly find yourself. What did you think of Emma's journey? Did Harrison get what he deserved? What would you have done in her situation? We want to hear all of your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. And if you were as captivated by this story of drama, resilience, and sweet revenge as we were, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for listening.